Can you hear me? Am I on? I think I'm on. Yes. Okay. Yay. We can't start unless I started exactly that way. Really? Immediately? Okay. So, first off, thank you guys so much for being here today for our wonderful, fantastic Strangelings Book Club meeting. We are lucky enough to be joined by Dorothy Barker and also by Megan Rosenbloom, who's here all the way from Los Angeles and is dealing with a chipper, shredder, murderer in the background. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. Megan and I will talk for like 20-30 minutes and visit, and then at the end we'll like open it up for everybody. So if at any point you have questions, just put them in the chat, and then Elizabeth, I've got dog hair in my mouth. Elizabeth is gonna look in the chat, and then she'll text me the questions so that I can ask them to Megan, and it's totally gonna work, and Dorothy Barker is gonna be good, right? Okay, so please welcome Megan.
Hi, hi everyone.
Dark Archives.
I'm really just here for Dorothy Barker.
Right? Aren't we all? Okay, first of all, thank you so much for writing this book, because it is absolutely phenomenal. When Elizabeth first, she always sends me this sort of rundown of like, here, 15 books that you might like, and then I read the 15 and go through, and when she sent me the link to this one, I was like, book about human skin, that's totally in my wheelhouse. And she was like, yeah, I know, and that scares me. And but I immediately, and I read it, and I was like, this is so good. And she was like, it is very good, but we're gonna lose people. And I was like, no, people are good. I'm just gonna say, just trust me. This sounds gross, but it is brilliant and heartbreaking and funny and smart and well-researched, and all of those things. And it was so wonderful when people started reading it, and there were so many people who, first of all, said, I was gonna read this anyway, so thank you for selecting it. So see, it's not just me. And secondly, who said this was not the book that I ever would have picked up, but I am so glad that I did. So thank you for writing it.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that, people maybe, some people took a little risk to read it. That's why I wanted some short title that was easy to say, but then I spent a lot longer on the subtitle because I wanted to make sure that you knew what you were getting into, right? I didn't want people to be like, oh, pretty cover, right? Just like jump in and be like, what? And, lose it. So it was like, I think that this book is not for everyone, and that's okay, but it's extremely for some people. And I feel like it kind of has, I've been really heartened that it's been finding its people. And that, the response has been so great. I really expected more, people being like, it's gross and you're gross and I hate you for doing this, but that hasn't, knock on wood, hasn't really happened yet. So it's been like a really good response, and it's so amazing to be here with so many people who have actually read my book. This is the first time I'm talking to people who've actually read it. So it's really exciting for me.
I love it. So, okay, so we usually start with the 5 weird questions that we ask everyone, and then I'll get into like real Megan book questions. So first 5 questions. So the first is, where would you be 2 weeks into the zombie apocalypse?
Dead. Definitely. Not even a question. I hope I'm delicious. I am not a very physically resourceful person. I have other skills, but I'm very klutzy. I'm not very strong. I feel like I'm not fast in any way. I feel like it would not go well for me.
Same. What is an underrated book that you think everyone should read?
That's such a good question. Underrated. Oh, okay. So I never hear anyone talk about this book. So I kind of have two favorite books, the all-time faves. And one is the very one where everyone's like, oh, that's your favorite. Yeah, great choice is Ulysses, and everyone hates you for liking Ulysses. So there's that on that side. But the other one is one I never hear anyone talk about, which is Milan Kundera, who wrote The Unbearable Lightness of Being. His book Immortality is the book that I give away the most. Well, it was the book I gave away the most until I started giving away Megan Devine's It's Okay That You're Not Okay, which is all about grief. I give that to so many people all the time. But before that, my number one giveaway book was Milan Kundera's Immortality. I think it's really, really readable, and it has a lot of very memorable visual moments in the book, but it also deals with some like really giant ideas. And then after you'll read a section and be like, oh wait, I just had a lot of big thoughts there while I was just kind of enjoying myself. I think it's really interesting. And so yeah, I would say that's my underrated.
Well, I'm putting that on my list, and I will say that I did read Ulysses, but I read the graphic novel. I don't know that some, but I feel like it counts. Also, that noise is my dog coughing on my lap. So just, she's got some issues. Let's see. What is your favorite word?
Incunabula.
I've never heard that word before. What does that mean?
Should I spell it for everybody? I'll spell it in the chat. Incunabula is ink. Watch me spell it wrong now. INCUNABULA. I don't. Am I able to chat to everyone?
Oh no, that just went to me. I can see it though.
Okay, there we go. Incunabula. Incunabula is our books from the birth. It comes from the word for cradle, and so it's from the birth of printing. Like the very early books that were printed are incunabula. Oh. And I used to have a cat for like 16 years, and her name was Banicula, and you can like almost anagram it into like I think it's albanicula would work as the anagram. There too.
Also a great book, just saying. Let's see. How do you like your eggs prepared?
Sleeper favorite that I again feel like I'm the only one who orders at a restaurant when we could go to restaurants is over hard.
That is exactly the right answer. Good job. Victor, I'm not the only one who orders over hard. All right, good. And then my last of the 5th questions is, will you be my friend?
Absolutely. We already are.
Yay. Let's see. So I have a lot of questions for you, and I wrote some of them down, and none of them are in the right order. And I think what I want to start with is, so you're a librarian, you're great at research. This book for me scratched a lot of the itches that I have in my head about research, and it felt a lot like, in a way, like genealogy searches, because you're searching for like the story, and then not only that, but also the actual science behind it, the DNA behind it. So what made you first get interested in this?
So it's so funny how, if you start at the end when a book comes out and, when you've written one, then you can kind of see all the little decisions you made to get to that place. Like I didn't get out of library school and was like, I will be the human skin book lady. That was not at all the thought, or any thought that I could have possibly had, and didn't even know what they were until I was already in library school. But I think that it's like you have a lot of interests, and I'm a person who has a lot of varied interests. So that's part of the reason I wanted to be a librarian, is that I like, and this isn't always necessarily valued in our culture or in academia, but I like knowing a little bit about a lot of things. I'm less a PhD, like very narrow focus person. I like seeing intersections and kind of interdisciplines and things like that. So I first saw the first ones as I kind of talk about in the book at the Mutter Museum, and they just completely knocked me off my heels. I was kind of like, what is this? And, looking around like, why isn't anyone doing something about these? Like, why are these here? I just had this really big reaction, even though there are all these other huge things to react to in the space, And, but then I just kind of tucked it away in my head and thinking, well, everything at the Mutter is super weird, and they probably don't exist elsewhere. And then every once in a while it will come up in conversation, and then I was surprised at how many places were like, oh yeah, I think we have one, or oh, I think people used to say we had one, but oh, I think it was just the campus tour guide saying stuff or whatever. But I'm like, why is this weird open secret that librarians know that these exist? And also they seem not to know that much about them, even though they know that there are rumors about them and they exist. Like, I can't, oh, I heard that we might have one type of thing. And that's what really kind of launched my curiosity. So even though at first I wanted to write a book, and I started thinking about writing like a different kind of book, I was just sort of poking around to think about what I could maybe try to write a book about that would be interesting enough to me to warrant writing a whole book, but also potentially interesting enough to other people to actually read it. And as I was doing that, I was also asking about the human skin books and stuff. And then at some point I was like, all right, this human skin book line is really the thing that is getting way more interesting to me. Like, originally it was going to be a chapter in a completely different book. And I was like, okay, this is getting really interesting. But then it was hearing about the scientific test. What in the world is that even? I have like everything closed.
It might have been me. Sorry.
Oh, okay. It's just like I'm trying to remember, like, I have to close Slack, I have to close Outlook, I have to close Gmail. So but I do have my database of human skin books open just in case I get a question that I have to look up. But so it was right at that time. It just so happened that I heard about that scientific test that happened, and I was able to schedule a meeting with a chemist who did it. And when we were talking and we were kind of comparing notes, I was like, oh yeah, we should do this. Like, we should kind of keep in touch. And it just really was so loose. And then then it just started snowballing in this big way. I mean, my work with the Order of the Good Death and Decilon happened the same way, where it's like these little chance meetings and these sort of mutual interests, and then the next thing you know, it snowballs into something so much bigger than you could have anticipated. And so even though I ran around like visiting all these books, then a lot of the research about them also came later too. So I had to revisit things. I had to do a lot of online research in addition. I did a lot of, in-person reportage kind of interviews and things like that until it became what it was. But that was like a 5-year long process until it became what it is. And it still kind of blows my mind that people are like, yeah, human skin book. That's what I want to read. I'm like, yay. It's like I feel like I took a pretty big risk, especially for a first book. And a lot of people took a big risk on me. So I'm just so pleased that, it's finding its way.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to find your group of weirdos is what I have, and luckily enough, this book club is filled with weirdos, so it's nice. Was something that you mentioned that I actually have on my question list. So can you tell us a little bit about the Order of the Good Death and death salons and all of that? Because you mentioned it a little bit in the book, but it's so fascinating.
Yeah, so the Order of the Good Death it started off as an online, and it still is, an online collective Started by Caitlin Doty, who I'm sure a lot of the people in this group are familiar with. She's got 3, amazing best-selling books, and she's a mortician and amazing. The videos that she does on YouTube, they've always been great, but now they're like basically really well done mini documentaries every week. I mean, just really stunning work that she does. And so the idea was getting Caitlin sort of curated a group of people that were like writers and artists and death professionals like morticians, death doulas, hospice workers, people who were doing work around death that were trying to open up conversations around it, trying to engage with death in a meaningful way, for people who are curious about it, to not shame that curiosity, to just make everything more open, right? And she came up with that idea of being death positive, basically partially off of the idea of sex positivity, where it's like, there isn't just one way to do things, and there is a lot of variation, and different times and cultures and time periods and cultures do things differently, and we can learn about them, and it can kind of open our minds about how things work. And that was sort of the beginning. And again, like I said before, we met. She asked me to be in the order, and I kind of didn't feel like I was like qualified enough to do that. I was like, I'm just a librarian, like a medical librarian. I'm not like working with dead bodies. I'm not some great big academic person or anything like that. But I think what she probably saw in me was my librarianly ability to like organize and stuff, right? And so as she kind of inducted a new class of people, and we were kind of talking on email, and we were saying, wow, there's people doing really amazing stuff here, and it sucks that we can't all get together and kind of talk. And then people were like, well, what if we did? And I thought, oh, I just planned a wedding a year ago in LA, maybe I can find a venue. That was literally like how I got involved in organizing it. And then in what would become Death Salon. And then some folks were saying, well, if we're getting all these people together, we shouldn't keep it to ourselves, right? We should also have this public element too. And so that's really how it started. And then we had our first one, and there was a big feature about us in Atlantic, and then it really just kind of again snowballed. Next thing you know, we're in London, we're in like cities all over the place doing it. We're on kind of long hiatus, maybe permanent, maybe not hiatus right now. We were on hiatus before pandemic, and now we're like, oh my god, I'm so glad we didn't try to like that we didn't have one planned for during that time. We would have been really in trouble.
That's not the kind of death positive that you want. That's not.
Well, it's like we certainly have a lot to talk about, but I mean,
yes.
In terms of the planning logistics, because we ended up doing deciding on doing like annual events. And what would happen is I would spend like a year planning this one event. We would put it up for sale, and it would sell out in a day, and people would like fly to be there and stuff, which is amazing. We love our people, but it's like, are we really outreaching in the best way? Are we really getting the people who come to speak? Are they getting the biggest kind of reach for what they're talking about? So we were tooling around with possible different formats to be able to have more and be a little bit more decentralized. And so that's kind of where we left things at the moment. So stay tuned eventually, but I mean, it could be quite a while at this point until we do something again, or figure out a way to do it that's like meaningful for people and accessible. We want to be as accessible as possible and kind of get to people who otherwise would not hear about us or know about us, and get them the kind of information and interaction that we want. But that's basically the whole death positive movement kind of thing, and the order in Death Salon. And but what's been really heartening is that, because there are a lot of I mean, Caitlin of course like huge in terms of the outreach and stuff, but then there are all these other members who are out there doing things. And then now we see people who identify their work as death positive, and people just call things death positive because it's like a thing now. So it's been amazing to watch people like grab onto the idea and understand it and run with it and do their own things. So that's been really cool for sure.
That's awesome. So as I started the book, I sort of read it kind of along with my mom, in that I would call her and be like, "Look, I read this part and I read this part." And when I first told her about it, she was like, "Yeah, I don't think that's for me." And she was like, "I'm pretty sure that's just Nazis." And I was like, "No, I don't think it was Nazis." And she was like, "Then serial killers." And I was like, "No, I definitely would have heard about it, because I'm real into serial killers, like not in a fan club kind of way, but just I read a lot about them." And so I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so." And my thought was, I bet it's made mainly doctors and medical. And the reason why I said that is because I used to work in a hospital in HR, and every day when I would walk to my office, I would pass this decapitated human head. And it was just out. It was just out, and nobody even noticed it. And every day I would walk by and I would like say hi to it, and I would feel really bad. And I would be like, "There's just a decapitated head here, just sitting here for anybody to walk by and be," and people didn't even realize that it was real. Um, and even after when I left to write my first book, one of the first things that I did when I sold my book was I was like, I need to rescue that head, because it's just like, people don't give a crap, like, and I need to do something. And so I went through all this like mess to try to see, like, can I get it? Can I bury it? Can I bury it with me when I'm buried? It was a nightmare and ridiculous, and the story is way too long, but that was when I was like, oh yeah, I can absolutely see the ability to make people as objects and, remove yourself. And I thought it was so fascinating, all of the misogyny and the classism and racism. And I loved how you looked at, the ethics behind it, that it wasn't just this is a fascinating story, but instead it was let's really look at the power dynamic. And I think that was such a fascinating discussion. I totally lost where my actual question was on that, because I got distracted by a human head under glass.
It happens to the best of us.
Right. And so I'm just going to go to the next question, which is, would you allow yourself to be skinned in your own book?
No.
No.
And yeah, it's funny, sometimes I'm just like, I'm on video here saying I do not consent, do not do this to me. I did my book launch at the Mutter Museum, like remotely, and I got a tattoo after I finished the book that is part of the Mutter. It's got Mutter connections and stuff like that. And Anna Doty, who's my friend and the curator there, she's like, "Oh, that's jar-worthy." She's like, "Do I get that? Can I have that?" And I'm like, "Hey, I haven't decided anything yet. Don't like pre-claim my body parts." She's like, "Can we just like nail that down right now?" I'm like, "Hey, it's mine." But it's I wouldn't. The main reason is not that I'm precious about my body, like my physical body and what happens to it. Although I kind of keep changing my mind a little bit about what my absolute preferred method of disposition is, and that's probably because I just know too much about all the new things that are coming up. So I'm like, ooh, it's like, ooh, human composting? That sounds great. That's really cool. And so, but in terms of being a book, I wouldn't want to be a book, because I think that if it were in a private collection, like your family or something like that, and I think about this probably more than other people do, because of some of the things I've seen happen to different, collections over time being a librarian, is that, you know, I could have this shelf full of books and they could be the loves of my life and my prized possessions. They could be all signed and, you know, different, you know, special things about them. But then is there any guarantee in any way that my daughter, when she grows up, is not just going to be like, oh yeah, these would go in the garbage, or you know, oh, I'll just give them to, you know, the thrift shop or whatever, because who wants stuff? Kids, you know, I don't want stuff. And then, you know, lo and behold, there's my literal ass in the garbage can or something like that. You know, I feel like that could really happen with a human skin book. Like, most of the time these books were, you know, someone wrote a note at some point in them that sort of tipped people off. But I know that people just don't wholesale donate collections without even opening things, you know, because sometimes I'll open things and be like, whoa, oh, this is like signed to this famous person or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's mostly it. I just feel like you can't trust anyone to actually like keep that book in a respectful way, or, you know, you don't know what, once you're an object, then who knows what happens to you after that. And that's a little too much uncertainty for me.
Yeah. So I saw the thing about human composting, and I thought, first of all, I thought that would be a good thing because it's probably the only time that I will ever compost in my entire life. And so it's like I've made up for not being green. But then I also, so my daughter is 16. And so as I was reading this book, I was like, look, I'm reading this book about like books bound in human skin. And she was like, don't buy any. And I was like, I would not buy a book bound in human skin. But would you want, because you like, you can do whatever you want with me when I'm dead. I was like, if you want, like we could get, you know, I probably have enough, like we could bound like maybe at least one of my books. And she was like, okay, first off, gross. And number two, have you seen the way that I treat my books? And she's right, because I treat them the same way, because I just dog ear them and eat while I'm, you know, reading them. And so, you know, fair enough. But here was like a question that we got into. She was like, I cannot imagine the idea of holding a human skin book. And, you know, I was explaining to her that, you know, you have to hold it with your hands and not with gloves, so that, you know, and she was like, I mean, just the idea of it. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, your whole body is covered in human skin. I'm covered in humans. I mean, we're bound in human skin. And she was like, yeah, but it's different because we're alive. And I was like, yeah, but like when you get the pet egg and you like scrape off your heels and then you open it up and there's all that stuff inside, that's just dead human skin. So what's the difference there? And she was like, that's not the same thing. But I like to say it is. So I'd like your opinion. Is it grosser?
I think that everyone has a line for sure. But I think it's kind of interesting. You know, it's funny. I was talking to, I used to be vegan for a long time, but I'm not anymore. And I was talking to a vegan friend who has been vegan since she was like 5, right? Which is pretty unusual. But Los Angeles, you know, and I was talking to her about the human skin book thing and thinking that she'd be really grossed out. And she was just kind of like, oh yeah, no, I get how doctors could do that. I totally get how that could happen and whatever. And she's like, you know, like how doctors could come to see someone as an object in that way. And she's like, well, when you look at in the library, when you're looking at antique books on a shelf or whatever, and you're seeing rows and rows of leather bound books, are you just seeing hundreds of dead cows? And I'm like, no, not at all. I don't think about that at all. I never once have thought about that until you said it. And then it just kind of really like, oh, see, like this is something we very commonly do in regards to animals, right?
Uh-huh.
And we do not do that in regards to people. I'm not saying that that is bad. I'm just noticing that that is true, right?
Right.
So I think that, so the first time I thought I held one, you know, it turned out later that it was fake. It was a surprise. And so that's not a thing people want to be surprised by. Like if you or ever someone, yeah, it's like, hi, you're holding a dead person. You know, that's like not really. But it was just because he didn't mean to surprise me with it. It just kind of happened that way. And so I was already holding it. He's like, oh, there's that human skin book you were looking for. I'm like, you know, so I had this kind of big reaction. But then, yeah, later found out it was fake. And then the first time I held one that was, I knew for sure was real and I was going in, was to see the one at Harvard. And so, yeah, I did kind of expect this sort of big, you know, huge moment or this crazy feeling that I would have when I held it and stuff like that. But I think that sort of like how you said you're not like are interested in serial killers. Part of the interest I think that happens with serial killers is that it's because it's like your neighbor. You know, the neighbors are always like, oh, Johnny was quiet, but he was always nice. He took the trash out, you know, that kind of thing. Like the hiding in plain sight of something really like unspeakable. I think that that is kind of what a real human skin book is like, because you're holding something. If you have the knowledge that you know it's real, you're holding something, you're like, this is what I'm holding, and you're telling yourself that, but what you're visually seeing is just a normal book. And so it's this kind of really weird thing where you're like, I know you're wrong. Like I know like there's something not okay about this, but I am still just holding a book. And it's really interesting for that like the experience could be interesting for that reason, because I don't think that happens that often, right? And it's sort of like, you know, the times that I've been in a crowded, you know, reading room, and there are all these other researchers with all their books and maps and things out who are doing research, and then I'm like over there opening my books and just thinking like they have no idea like what I'm doing, you know. And then but sometimes, you know, the attendant would like whisper to one of their, you know, regulars like, hey, see that girl over there, she's got this skin books out, and then you see people start going like, you know, look over. But yeah, there is this like kind of frisson kind of like feeling, but it's all just because of what you know about it and not the sensory input of it, I guess. So I don't tend to get creeped out except the suede ones, because for some reason the texture of the suede, that really takes it over the edge for me.
Yeah.
Like I really do feel like those feel gross when you're holding them.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's not really the same thing, but so my dad is a professional taxidermist. So I grew up with, you know, taxidermy and blood and hides, and even, you know, my dad was like, oh yeah, peeing on the hide, yeah, that's the way they used to do it and whatever. And so this was just like some of the stuff that I read, I was like, oh no, yeah, I know what that smell smells like. Oh no, I know what that looks like. Oh no. But it's the same thing with, you know, his taxidermy doesn't bother me, even though I don't like to see it being done, but it doesn't bother me. But when it's pet taxidermy, it's there's something very different about it, and it shouldn't be. It's animals are animals, right? And they're either way, you're enjoying them and appreciate them. But when I see pet taxidermy, I'm just like, nope. There's a line, and I can't explain it because it doesn't make sense logically. But I think that's probably, you know, a very similar sort of thing with the, you know, with the suede books and the human books and the sort of look like human books and aren't human books.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. It's like this weird thing. I think I just found the thing that was making the noise, so I'm getting rid of it. Out. Get away, you. I was before, you can tell I'm a librarian because before, like right before I was in this, I was doing this like super techie kind of training with Open Refine and Tableau and all this stuff. So I had a million windows and tabs open and lost them. Like I lost some of them and couldn't find it to shut it. But anyway, yeah, there is a line. Yeah. And everybody has their line about where their disgust is, and I kind of think that that's interesting too. Like for me, if you're just talking about general dead bodies, body parts, whatever, it's like bones, nothing. Take me to the catacombs. I had a blast there in France, you know.
Me too.
Totally happy to, I don't own, you know, human remains or anything like that, but I like, you know, going to places and seeing stuff like that are really interesting historical kind of tastefully done experiences or whatever. So bones, no problem. Then you get into like, okay, something that's like dried or whatever, it's like all right. And taxidermy depends on the skill involved. I feel like has a lot to do with me, or if I know anything about the situation which it was created, that helps. And then, but like, yeah, I don't really own any taxidermy. Sometimes there's been a few times where someone's like gifted me something, I'm like except the one thing. I do have one thing that's like a 1930s vintage like mink stole thing. That's the whole face and the, and a really dear friend in the death positive movement gave me that, but she did not tell me she was sending me anything. And it was for my birthday, and I opened my door and there's just like a, manila envelope. And I open it and then I'm like, oh, that's a face. And then I start pointing, I was like, oh, it's a whole body. It's like, oh my gosh. But like, it is, so she felt okay giving that to me because it was vintage and, like, so it's like this thing would have been thrown out.
Yes, it
Whatever.
didn't die for you.
Yeah, it's a kind of different. And Brooke Weston's work, I don't know if you've ever seen her taxidermy work. Yeah, so those are all taxidermied pieces that she creates like fantastical worlds out of. That kind of thing I feel more comfortable with. Like, I love her stuff. I would totally have something from her because I think her stuff is really cool. But when you get into like wet specimen land, I'm like tapped out, no thanks. I am just really not into the wet specimens. I am into the skill that it takes to maintain them and create them. I think that that's very interesting, but it's not the kind of, it does kind of creep me out a little bit. So
I am surrounded by taxidermy because I collect it, but I only collect ethical taxidermy. So they had to like die of natural causes, mainly roadkill, or they had to have died before I was born, so that they didn't die for me. But it's all like, I don't know if you can see, that's fleece witherspoon. So it's an alpaca, and there's right beside me is actually a like 100-year-old. It's much taller than me, but it's a bear, and it's dressed up in a full like jury outfit, and it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so they're all dressed up, and they all have their names, and it's ridiculous. But I think lovely. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I think.
Oh, for sure.
So I've got a couple of questions for you from the audience. Let's see. Other than books bound in human skin, what are your favorite things to see at the Mutter Museum?
Ooh, great question. Well, besides my friend Anna Hart.
She's lovely, by the way. She sent me one of her children books.
Yes.
Museum. It's so good. It's so good, you guys. You should check it out. It's really good.
Everyone should check out the book she wrote, which it's her son giving a tour of the Mutter Museum for children. It's really interesting. And you can actually tell in that book, she has a really similar kind of mindset to me about what we should do with these objects, or the way we should interact with them. And so she's like, as he's going around and seeing all the dead bodies in various, states, the sort of kind of ghosts of the people that they were are sort of coming with him. And it's like really person focused. And like these, trying to know about the people and the situations in which like this stuff happened and stuff. And I think that's really fascinating. So of course I love that. The people work at the Mutter are so great. And let's see, objects. I love the drawers of things that people swallowed and got rescued out of them, even though it really creeps me out. I don't know why. It's like, it's very, if you're someone who likes like little compartments and stuff, there's a certain thing that's sort of fun about that, the interaction. Soap Lady is fascinating. The bits of presidential assassins. And yeah, I mean, I could just go on and on. They just put the iron lung out on display, but before, for a long time, the iron lung was just in the hallway outside of Anna's office. So I would always, make a Radiohead joke like, oh, I'm grateful for my iron lung, whenever I saw it. And I'm like, why do you just have an iron lung like in your hallway, to the way that your head was in the hallway? It's like, why is this here? Those little surprises, I guess, are part of the fun. Oh, I do have a funny mooter story though, if you want to hear it. Like,
Yes.
I've gotten to tell anybody this in a long time. It doesn't really work in like print. But one of the first times I got like the back room tour, which is like, yeah, you get to go into the bone room and the wet specimen room and, see like the places that aren't really open to the public. So the wet specimen room has all of the specimens that need to be tended to in some way. Like they got off color for a certain reason because the, chemicals shift, and they have to super duper carefully like clean things and replace them and whatever. It's really delicate, difficult work. And the director at the time, Robert Hicks, who has this hilarious like gallows humor kind of, he's very funny in like a very dark, dry way. He had pet leeches at the museum that he would let feed off of him and stuff, like, and name them after famous doctors. He's just like a real hoot of a guy. He seems very serious, and then you realize that he's not. But he was showing us around this room, and it was like everyone's like really like crammed in. It was just me and a couple other people, and there are all these racks of jars, and you're just like, please don't let me knock into the conjoined twins or something like that and knock them over. So you're already kind of on edge, and it's cold and you feel weird. And he's like leaning on the table all casual, and he's like, what my favorite specimen is in here? And I'm like, no. And he's like, this one right here. And it's like this jar with a heart in it. And you could tell there was something wrong with it because like the liquid was kind of yellow in a way, and it looked a little too bright. And I was like, oh, okay, I can see why it's in here. And he's like, do you know why I like it so much? And I'm like, no. And he's like, because it tastes so good. And he like licked the jar on the outside, and I was like, ah! I was like kind of like, I just stood there for a second like, what just happened? Like, did that just happen? And then he revealed that it was a hyper realistic like candy. It was a wet specimen that was candy, and it was so good that you could easily mistake it for a real wet specimen. And then he showed me, he's like, look, I put a piece of tape here because that's where I lick it, and then other people, when they do the trick, they like lick it on the other side.
Awesome.
I was like, that is amazing. Imagine that's your workplace. You can do stuff like that. It's so funny.
I'm pretty sure that guy's my dad, because he would 100% do that, except it might also possibly be a real heart. So hard to say. So this is a great question. It's actually several questions, but they're so good. So I'm just going to say it all. Okay. Since the book came out, have there been an uptick in the people that you've heard from wanting their books tested? And does that mean that you've discovered any new human books as a result? And actually, I'm going to start with that, and then I'll read the other part.
Yes, we're getting more, requests from people, more, feelers. And some of them, as you might imagine, my email's always been pretty weird. Like my inbox is full of terrors, but it's gotten weirder. And some of those folks are, some of them are, it's just a real shaggy dog story about where the thing came from and why they think it's human. And I'm like trying to tease out, I'm like, okay, before you drop money for lab fees to do this, let's like figure out if the object is like really has any reason, except you think it's weird for some reason, that would make you think it's human. So I try to like tease that out of them. So that can be kind of interesting. But there have been a number of like private collectors coming up, and some from countries I hadn't heard from before. So that's always cool to like expand the geography. And I do have a couple of translations coming out in like Poland and Russia and France. And so I think if I continue to get like more translations, that there will be more people hearing about it, and then like more things will come up as well, which will be pretty interesting. So I'm just kind of leaving my, inbox open, see what people have to say. So there's definitely interest, but I haven't gotten new interest from an organization yet. So that's why the Anthropodermic Book Project website hasn't changed, is because we don't have new allegeds that are in public collections. These are all private people. So one of the things I'm going to do if I ever have any time, because I'm a toddler mom in pandemic working a full-time job, so that's like a thing that is crazy. But if I ever like manage to dig out from some of that, then I'm going to start really codifying these like private, requests, and seeing if I can get them folks to share with that. But I had a Zoom call with a guy to show me a skim book. uh so this stuff happens sometimes. I'm not saying I'm always available for such a thing, but it was interesting enough that it was worth checking out. But I told him, like, I can't tell if your book is human just by zooming and stuff. That's not gonna do it. But if you want to chat, like, okay. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening that are coming up. And I keep seeing little, like, people are now tagging me more in stories where it's like, oh, I heard about this or whatever. So people are out there giving me leads, which is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I do want to keep going with it as much as possible. And I want to kind of double down on some of the ones that are far in other countries to try to get them tested and see what happens. Especially the English ones, I feel like those are more achievable. And as you guys can tell in the book, like, there are all these fascinating stories around those English ones because of the capital punishment element, but I haven't gotten to test any of them yet. They have great stories behind them that make you want to believe that they're real, and I generally would want to think that, but I don't ever want to say anything until we've got like results in hand, because I can be surprised either way so many times.
Right. That totally makes sense. Let's see. What was the most interesting thing that you learned in the research for this book? Or the most disturbing thing? Interesting or disturbing?
Interesting. There were a few things around Charles Hartman that I found really interesting. He was the guy who got the Phyllis Wheatley books created, and I had never heard of him before. And it was really like, it felt, I was going totally blind trying to find, things about these books. And it just kept unraveling in ways I didn't expect, where I should just find things and be like, wait, what? And then, so in terms of research process, I know for a lot of people it might not be the most interesting to them, but for me, it felt like the biggest finds and stuff. I found it interesting that this guy tried to create a utopian book farm in like the South and tried to invite librarians and people to live with him, and no one came to live with him, and that he used to walk around naked on site and stuff, and that might be part of it. I thought that was super funny. Someone had wrote a great article about the book farm, and I found it, and I was like, oh, this is gold. This is so good. But then also in terms of really more formal, like actual primary source research with the same thing, was finding the invoice in University of Mississippi libraries. One of their archivists there helped me find this piece of paper that I was just like, oh, can you help me find anything to do with his like human skin books or whatever? Like, did he keep receipts for stuff? Did he whatever? Just trying to figure out how he got them made. And to be able to see this invoice from a well-known binder that said it was from 1934, and that was like the latest hard evidence I had for when the book was actually bound, right? And just the fact that it says using leather supplied, like, what a euphemism. I'm just like, oh my gosh. But like, if you saw that, just, you were not looking for human skin books, you're just happened to look at that in an archive, you'd be like, boring, flip back. And then it just so happened that because it was kept and I had the information that, hey, there are these Wheatley books, and my team tested them and we know they're real. And then I saw that and I was like, whoa, that was like a big, moment for me to be able to tie all that together and also find out how much you paid, because
Right.
that can be a big question a lot of times, like how much does this cost? And sometimes this really depends. So those were really exciting, I guess, finds for me.
Yeah. But one of my favorite things about this book is how often I would be reading and there would be so like say the Phyllis Wheatley, stuff. I read it and then I was like, I'd never even heard of her before. And so I immediately go out and I'm like, I've got to learn more. And I'm looking at all these articles and I'm doing all this. And that happened over and over with me where I was like soap lady, because I've never been to the Muter Museum. It's on my list, but I've never been. And I'm like, I had to look her up and what does she look like? And how do we not know who she is? And who's the American Giant? And what was so great is that there were all these great stories and then all these like lovely little tidbits that were just a little bit of itch where I'm like, okay, now I got to go read this book about this. Now I have to go, which was a really lovely, lovely thing. Actually, this ties into this. Someone has asked, have you ever heard of or read the book, The Invention of Murder by Judith Flanders?
No.
Well, I haven't either, but several of the books and murder cases discussed in that book, in your book, were in that book, specifically the Red Barn murder. So that's a suggestion for you, and I'm going to write that down myself.
Yeah, the Red Barn murder was one of the better documented ones that I found, but being American, I have a feeling it was a lot more famous in England, and I had never heard of it before this book, and like before I heard about the Skin book. And then when I started doing research about it and seeing that there was all this like pop culture stuff that happened with it, and even a Tom Waits song, which is actually pretty good, called Murder in the Red Barn. So yeah, it was like, I realized, oh, this was a really big deal. This was a really, and I tried to kind of make that very obvious in the book as well, where people were like smushing themselves up against glass, breaking window panes, trying to get a look at this guy. It's like one of those trial of the century kind of things, and that's why I thought it was like so fascinating, that it could be something that looms so large that in this small little cute town, it's still like, here's our big Red Barn area with all the gross like little trinkets and stuff, and they're just immensely kind of happy to tell people about the thing that made their town famous. It's really pretty. I love, there was so much first person like journalism and stuff that existed from that I was able to mine. That's why writing some of those chapters were really fun, because I could really make it narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the other ones, there's so much less that I could find to work with, that it just had to be what it could be. But the ones where I had a lot, like the George Walton chapter, where he just gave it to me, and he's the only one we really get to hear from himself. And so that was the first chapter I wrote, and it pretty much, it changed very little throughout all the process, because I was just kind of letting him speak through me, because he was so funny and charming and interesting that I just kind of let him go with it,
I loved the part where you wrote about how there were so many women up on the roof trying to get a peek in. The roof was going to collapse, and they were like, "Fine, women can come in," because it just reminds me of how many women who are into this, particular thing. And I'm like, that does not surprise me at all. And apparently it surprised everybody involved, that they were like, what? Women would want to look at this? What? And I'm like, yeah, of course they would. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was part of what I found, like when I was looking at that. It was like, well, okay, there was a clear, huge interest from women of all social classes, right? Because they talked to the, the very highfalutin ladies who's like, I want to see what happens to this guy, basically, like who would do this to another woman, I want to see him get his justice, kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, this sounds a lot like people who are really into true crime right now. And I really feel like it's a, attempt to wrest control over the idea of danger or chaos, you know?
Mhm.
And that is the psychological like itch that it scratches, I think is really interesting. And I bet it really kind of, you know, ebbs and flows with the times about like how anxious the times are and like how you feel personally safe or unsafe with how much interest there is in true crime and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I have a lot of anxiety, and I think there's so much because the lack of control is one of the things that makes my anxiety worse. But the more information I have, and the more control that I have over the information that I'm getting in and what I should know, can make such a difference. And you think it would be just the opposite, that you know, listening to a true crime podcast, I'd be like, oh no, the world is awful. And instead I'm like, oh, I could take down that murderer. Now I know exactly how they're thinking. And now I know, which is possibly more dangerous, actually, now that I think about it.
I have the same exact mindset, and that's actually part of what makes me death positive, is that I'm terrified. Like I'm an anxious, terrified person, and if I can know more about something, then I feel like more able to control certain if I know I can control certain things about it, it gives me a lot of relief, like a lot of emotional and psychological relief to like not be thrown into something and just be like, I have no idea what's going on, you know. And so being able to prepare, being able to know things like that, like, and that just general, you know, journalist, librarian kind of mindset, it's all about, yeah, it's comforting to know more. And I
Yeah.
feel like those things really have a lot in common.
Yes. Can you hear my husband running for the phone to turn it off, because I was supposed to have turned it off before this started? So I have one more question for you to sort of end with, and I think it's a interesting question. Let's see. Is there, wait, where am I? Is it at all likely that I would come across a book bound in human skin in an antique shop and it not be marked as such? What should I look for, if so?
Well, if it's not marked, I don't think you're going to be able to tell. Like if there's no writing inside that says it's bound in human skin, then I don't think you're going to be able to tell really. So, um, is it possible? It's totally possible. Is it likely? Probably not very likely, because usually at some point, I mean, but then again, who knows? Because maybe maybe we can only find the ones that have been written in, you know, and maybe there are just a bunch of other ones that are just around that, you know, like in that example about me dying and my daughter like throwing me in the trash can, that kind of thing, where it's like, oh, grandpa had this book and he was a doctor and it was on the shelf with all the other ones, and if he didn't write in it, then yeah, it could totally be mistaken for something else you wouldn't really know. Yeah.
Right. Totally makes sense. Awesome. Well, yeah, I think you have answered all of our ridiculous questions, and I'm so grateful that you came on, because I literally could talk about this for hours and hours, and still come up with even more ridiculous things to talk about. So I so appreciate you coming on. I so appreciate you sharing your knowledge and sharing your book, because it was one of my favorite things that I read this year. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. This was like so amazing to be able to, you know, for you to invite me, and then for all these people to read my book and think about it and talk about it is just blows my mind every day. So it's really just like the best part, right? It's the best part.
Awesome. Fantastic. Awesome. And look at everybody saying thank you. You guys are the best. And thank you guys to everybody who are currently pantsless. And I'm about to join you. I mean, not physically join you, but you know what I mean. The next, what is our next book? I always want to say 30 Days of Night. That's not right. It sounds like that, but it's not. It's 30 Days of Night. Thank you, Elizabeth. My God. It's so good. It's being sent. I think it's already been sent out. So you guys should be getting it soon. If you haven't already, Elizabeth says it was shipped last week. So you guys should be getting it soon if you haven't already. And we'll discuss it in the future, because I know everybody is overwhelmed. And got it. Okay, I see people saying they've already got it. Yay! So some people are getting it early. So yeah, I will talk to you guys again soon. And thank you again, Megan, for coming. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.